Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a new episode here on the Mainstream Indie Music channel. We have a pretty interesting video. We're going to do a deep dive today. Originally, I had another video actually planned, but it was remembering an article that I saw on this very topic and kind of digging into it. I kind of shifted gears a little bit last minute, and I wanted to talk about, obviously, the title of the video today. But before I begin, I want to welcome all 328 subscribers. Thank you so much for your guys' support. And all of the new ones, if you haven't subscribed, that's okay. You're welcome here. I'm glad that you're here checking out the music videos. Maybe one day I can have a subscription from you, but if not, that's all right. Before I begin, I want to apologize for the sound of my voice. My sinuses, I had a sinus infection this last weekend. So I'm a little stuffed up and sound probably a little weird, but, I'm going to press forward. I'm going to go on with this video. So the title of the video corresponds to why are so many bands canceling shows, canceling concerts. And what's interesting is, sorry about the cough there. Canceling shows, canceling concerts, of course, is nothing new. Since the, most recent, newest wave of musical art performance, of rock and roll, onwards, from the 20th century on to where we are today, canceling shows has always been a thing. But it was one article in particular started off this research wave in that it had said that Jennifer Lopez had not only canceled a concert, but she had canceled her entire tour. Same with the indie band, which I want to talk about one day, but it's one of the most famous recent indie bands. Same with the Black Keys. Canceled a huge wave of their, again, not only one concert, they canceled the entire tour, and not only that, they've rebooked and rescheduled their tour to be in more smaller venues. Sorry if I cough also. By the way, throat's still not 100%. So, that's what caught my eye. Like, okay, that's a little different, to have bands do this. Now, before I go into kind of the small history of this, because that's going to play a factor into our final conclusion, why bands do this, for the aforementioned reasons or examples that I gave, has a little bit to do in the musical era that we live in. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is nowadays we are living, of course, in the information age. What is it? I think it said something about like Spotify. There is thousands and thousands, maybe tens, maybe hundreds of new songs that are uploaded to Spotify every single day. I like to remember during the early days of indie music in this modern era, back to the early 2000s. That's why indie really took off with the explosion of the internet, because that's when people kind of came to realize, like, oh, wait a minute, this is a new band that, isn't played on the radio, but is really, really talented. And then fans of the band could unite over that one band that shared, experience of liking this band, and you did not have that connection before. It didn't exist because there was no way for fans to stay and remain in contact. So pretty much that's why they had to tour all the time, because there was no other choice. Nowadays, you have not only the internet, but you have social media, where you can follow the band itself. You can follow the individual band members of said band on social media. It doesn't matter where you live. You can stay in touch with them. So that's what makes this newest wave of shows cancellations so different? Is that before it was you had to follow the formula of how music was laid out and you didn't have a choice. So, bands would record new music, they would release the new music, the airwaves, the radio would play the new music, and then the band would tour to promote sales of their album more and more. If they didn't do that, they would be dead in the water, essentially, even if they were very talented. Because in order to spread word of mouth, you had to go on tour, you had to play shows, you had to play venues. Nowadays, with computer-generated music, with social media, you can just release tracks, you can just release songs, you can just release music videos and decide not to tour, or maybe tour later, or even go on like a small tour, but that's it. However, there is a double-edged sword to this said argument. So let's use one of those examples that was in the article that I had read about the Black Keys. Let's use them for example. Now, the Black Keys have been a very popular indie band. I would venture to say they're a little bit in the mainstream, but probably not too much. You had their two massive hits back in the mid-2000s, followed up by the album after that also did produce more hits of theirs as well. But, as much as I like the Black Keys, realistically speaking, the average person, the average music listener is probably only going to know a couple Black Keys songs. They might not even know the name of it. Sometimes I even struggle to remember what the name of some of their hits is. And again, I'm not trying to say this to hate on the Black Keys. I love the Black Keys. But let's be realistic here. They probably for years since the release of Brothers had gotten used to performing at huge venues, because around that period of time they were huge. They would draw massive groups of people to their shows. Now, if you think about it, their album was probably released, their hit album, Brothers, was probably released over 10 years ago. So, again, for us kids that grew up in the 2000s, 10 years ago band would have been a band from the 1990s. So if a band from the 1990s was going around trying to promote and make people remember their music, yeah, granted, for some of those 90s bands, it probably would work. You would have a very loyal fan base of people. But for the majority of them, more than likely, if they tried to tour in massive rock arenas, they tried to tour in football, NFL stadiums, huge basketball stadiums, it's probably not going to work. Or at the very least, it's going to work in maybe just a few cities, but for the most part, especially if they're just going to tour in one country, it's not going to be worth the money that they're pouring in. And we're going to get to the touring aspect of it here in a little bit. But let's be real. When was the last time the Black Keys had a massive, massive audience reception? And again, I know this is an indie music channel, so it's not solely about the numbers. It's not solely about popularity. But when you are talking about touring, you have to put these factors into play. You have to. Just realistically speaking. And so, while some people applauded their ambition, I bet a lot of people probably saw, where they wanted to play. They saw how much tickets were costing. And they said, a couple $100 for a Black Keys concert, and I'm going to be in the nosebleed section, far away from the stage? I think not. And before you know it, they canceled, had to redo it, playing in smaller venues. Now, there is nothing wrong with playing in smaller venues. A lot of concert goers will tell you that some of their favorite shows were played in smaller, more intimate venues, arenas, stages, and so forth. I love it. One of my favorite concerts was Leon Bridges, and he played in a little state theater. It was an amazing show, and it wasn't big, but it was just the perfect size for him. And for a lot of these indie artists, maybe barring, the top 10% of indie artists, you are going to have to go with that smaller venue. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, if you are going to include traveling overseas, again, that is going to play another whole factor. I think we as fans, we don't realize how much work goes into that, right? Because then again, you have to, the manager of this said band has to take into account, how many people are involved in this band? How many people do they want to bring with them on this tour? Where are they going to stay? Not just for one night, but in many nights in many different countries. Where are we going to stay? How much is that going to cost? Do we have an international audience that is going to embrace our music? Or is there just a handful of locations, as cool as it would be to tour for them, and it's not going to be worth the money? Now again, some indie bands caught their wave, you could say, at the right time. I think of indie bands like Block Party. I think of indie bands like Arctic Monkeys, like Arcade Fire. They have a very loyal fan base all over the world. But it's knowing your audience, because you take another example that I used in that said article, Jennifer Lopez. She is another massive talent, and she's in pop music. She's not even in the indie music. But, many people say, they do wonder, was it just family drama, which she is going through, to be fair. But some people do wonder, was it because of low ticket sales? And again, it's the same thing. You have to know your audience. Now, what's interesting, the second factor. So the first one you could say is knowing your audience. The second factor is, what is the time period that we are living in during these circumstances of when, canceling concerts is happening? What's interesting is, I did a lot of research into that because I was curious. I looked up, canceling concerts, canceling shows in the 2020s, in the 2010s, in the 2000s, in the 1990s. Like I said in the intro, canceling concerts is not a new thing. But what's interesting is, along with it just being the age of the internet, but another huge hit of articles came in the time period of 2010. Now, if you remember, in 2008 in America, we hit a massive recession. Our prices for everything skyrocketed, but people were being fired left and right. They could not afford things. So going to concerts again was kind of out of the question. And so in 2010, when bands were trying to tour, a lot of them ended up, and I saw many articles on this, canceling their shows because of poor ticket sales. So again, where are we? We're in 2024, right? Now, granted, our U.S. economy is not as bad as it was back in 2008, but some venture to say it is pretty close. And what's kind of interesting is, unlike 2008, the effects of prices for things is being felt worldwide. And even amongst a generation of people are starting to wonder, is it worth it going to a concert? Again, for some bands, absolutely. Because while there are the stories of the aforementioned groups, Black Keys and J-Lo's, you have the flip side of Taylor Swift and Beyonce, who are both on tour right now, or at least Taylor Swift is just wrapping up her tour, and she hit worldwide records for how much her tour made in money. So again, it is not just a one-size-fits-all answer. which leads me to the next category, and that is ticket sales, how tickets are being distributed to the public. Again, beforehand, there was no question there was only one way to get it. It was through the venue where the concert was being held. It was through a ticket organizer was how tickets were sold. Then, when you fast forward to the big indie boom of the 2000s, I remember this from very first-hand experience. I went to many shows in my late teens and early 20s. The major way that you got tickets was through the music venue online. And eventually that leads to how tickets are sold nowadays with things like Ticketmaster, with things, what's that other concert app? I'm forgetting. There's many of them, right? There's many concert apps. There is tickets being sold on Facebook. There is tickets being sold on Craigslist. The list goes on and on and on. And the problem is, people have taken advantage of it. And they do this, sadly, even for indie groups. They do this, where they buy the tickets at pretty reasonable price, even though a lot of people still venture to say tickets are too expensive, even nowadays. But what they do is they buy it at that initial price, and then they jack the price up and resell the ticket. In so doing, they make a profit. So once again, people see the price of the resale value and they think, a couple $100 to see this concert, even $100, $60 to see this concert, I would love to, but that's a little too expensive for a concert. Now, to kind of sum up, because I don't want to make this a doom and gloom kind of video. Are there still big groups of people that love concerts? Absolutely. Do I think concerts are going anywhere for the foreseeable future? No, I do not. Festivals are still huge all over the world, right? Now, I posted on this channel about a month or two ago that Damon Albarn called out, concert goers of this modern age, and saying all they do is kind of hold up a phone and video record the concert. That is definitely true. The culture of concert going has changed. Some say it's for the worse. I don't know. What I do know is there are still many people that love to go to concerts. Now, again, kind of summing up all those points that I made, whether it was knowing your audience, whether it was the pricing of touring, whether it was how tickets are being sold, or whether it was the culture of concert goers as we know it in this modern era. With all those things in mind, I would say the most important thing, not that, big, huge indie bands are listening to this channel, but the most important thing, especially for indie bands to gauge, is just simply gauge your audience. How old is your audience? Are you one of those indie bands from the early 2000s? More than likely, your age is going to be concert goers 30 to 40, maybe to 50 years old. Now, people in that age bracket, struggling to make ends meet, have families, and so forth, are they going to blow a couple $100 just for one ticket, to a concert? More than likely not. However, would they consider spending $50 on a concert or less? Yeah, they would. And there are a lot of bands that still do that to this day. I'm already thinking of the last two concerts that I went to was Airborne Toxic event. I think theirs was $50. I'll be frank, I love Airborne Toxic event. I thought that was a little pricey. And then I saw Less Than Jake, which was around 30 to 40. I thought that was an amazing price, and the audience reflected it. So take account into your audience how old they are. Take into account your audience when picking a venue. As much as I love those two bands, if they were to pick a venue in a huge arena or football stadium, as much as I love them, honestly, they are not going to sell that out. So both of them We're in small, intimate venues, and we had a lovely time, absolutely lovely time. You know, just the bands have done overtime as well. Many of them group together, they tour together, so that ends up working out as well. You can kind of get a bigger venue in that way, but again, you know, you have to figure out the logistics of doing that. But if anything, wrapping this video up, what happened to J-Lo, what happened to the Black Keys, what has happened to many artists lately about canceling shows? Would I blame it solely on the audience? No. Would I blame it a little bit on the artist? Yes. However, do I believe concerts are here to stay? Absolutely. And please, 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 to kind of sum up this video, please support your indie artists. Don't forget about them. You know, if anything, they're the artists that I wouldn't mind spending a little extra money for. You know, I did kind of make a little zinger at Airborne Toxic event, but I would spend, you know, a couple extra dollars on an indie band. Go see your local shows too, your local bands. You know, there are still many smaller venues out there that support local artists. There are many coffee shops that support local artists. There are many jazz clubs that support your local artists for $10, $20, $30 a ticket. You know, you can see an amazing show, have a good time, and you're supporting a local business. But that's all I got to say about it. You know, I want to hear from you guys. How do you feel about the atmosphere of concerts nowadays? Do you think the blame goes on the audience? Do you think the blame goes on bands kind of being a little bit overzealous, over greedy a little bit? And where do you think the future is going for concerts? That's all I got for this week. I will see y'all next week.